become aware of the blessing, become aware of the wonder, become aware of the fact that this life is not a punishment, that you are not thrown into something to suffer, but your suffering is connected with many misunderstandings. And rather than going to fight against it and trying to run away from the apparent suffering, look at everything and learn to wait so that the understanding can happen when you are not trying to figure it out from the head. That is why patience is very, very important. And patience, not as a concept to force a certain patient look, patience by becoming aware of the impatience, looking at the process of impatience and all the fear, all the calculations, all the anxiety and all the feeling of helplessness. Watch everything. And staying with that what is in this way, you start becoming more directly, deeply capable to receive, to experience that what really is. So this is your responsibility towards yourself. This is your chance, this is your blessing, but you have to understand it rightly and bring it in life. I would like to take this and to bring some basic factors into attention. In a way it is so obvious because you hear it so many times, but in the practice it gets forgotten. And that is the tendency of the human mind to reduce everything into a knowledge and to hold to it as a knowledge rather than seeing that all knowledge is relative and you should use it only as an orientation and not something to hold to in a blind way. That is why it is said that all what is written, said, spoken in the inner journey, see it more as poetry rather than prose. Why is it so? Of course, many of you know it already. Because each mind is interpreting each word, each sentence, each expression with their past, with their associations, with their conditioning. And the conclusions one makes out of that is often so different. That is why it becomes very necessary to keep the remembrance, not to settle in any knowledge. And this is what also is connected with the statement, don't get into a fixed attitude or idea about who you are and what you are, because this is all a mental way to fix you in a role, which in certain state looks like a orientation help. If you are not aware of it, it becomes a stagnation and it prevents you from being in a conscious way vulnerable and open to life. So become aware of the danger, because this is the sense behind this ongoing interaction in the inner work. Because so many things in the subtlest form can be interpreted differently, misunderstood differently. And it is not that you are trying to do it deliberately, that is a point. Because if you are not aware and see that the words are just an indication, the words are not the truth. So you hear me so often quoting the Chinese mystic Lao Tse, where he refused to write a book. And when under pressure he was writing Tao Te King, he started with the indication that truth cannot be said, and that what is said is a lie. Of course, he brings many aspects which are very deeply valuable into consideration. But if people forget this first sentence and consider it carefully, because it's not that he is telling a lie, but it's in the very nature of the reality that any particular word which is said, everybody has different interpretations, different associations, different feelings, different undercurrent processes going on. So when you become alert about it, then you see how important it is to stay wakeful and not reduce everything into a knowledge. Because the person of understanding is not settling in any knowledge. The person of understanding is aware that logically you can explain it in one way and argue for it, and you can also put it the same thing from the other angle and argue for that. And it is how it is in the very way of going in human life. Many of you also know this anecdote about an advocate who used to travel in India from one high court to another high court in different states, taking flights to attend to different cases, because he was very well known and he was mostly very successful. And he had the understanding. In one occasion it was happening like that. There was a case and he was coming. There was an assistant who was bringing all the files which are for the case. And he started the argument for the client, so to speak. And he was arguing very brilliantly. And the assistant was pulling his dress sometimes and wanted to tell him something, but he was so much in the argument he didn't attend to that. And when there was a little break, the assistant said, "Now we have destroyed the whole case because you were arguing the whole time for our opponent. And you argued in such a way that it looks like we have no chance." The advocate looked at him and said, "Okay, don't worry, we'll have some possibility." And when the session started again, he started by saying, "I have been saying all the arguments which our opponent can bring, and in many clever ways, in all different ways. Now, I will put up the arguments of my client." And he argued brilliantly, and he won the case. In a way, if you look carefully, you can see that with the logic you can go in this way or that way, because it's all words, it's all concepts. Whereas what is important is, especially in the deeper process, to be aware of the limitation of all words and knowledge, and to see and consider what is meant by these words. Where is it pointing to? Because you have to be aware of the danger, you have to be aware of the tendency to hold to words, to hold to concepts, so that you have a feeling of having it in the grip. And mostly people do that also because it gives them a feeling of security. But the fact is, the security which you feel that way is false. It should not be an argument, it should be your understanding coming through deep consideration, and it is not then a fixed concept. Then you are also aware that it can be seen from different angles, and the reality is more deep, more mysterious than what we can reduce into knowledge. And in going deeper in this way, you start connecting to your source. You start coming in touch with the dimension beyond the logical, rational mind. And this is very, very important. Because once you can have the understanding and have the courage to live with this conscious vulnerability, your life is transformed. Because you see that, what way can I judge anybody? My judgment is a projection through my conditioning. And then you are not getting trapped in knowledge, and you don't go into the comparison and competition and get into feeling superior or inferior to anybody. And then you start living with a quality of what I call sacredness. Because you see that when everyone is created uniquely, you don't need to try to be special, because you are special, you are unique. And in your trying to be special, which is the most tendency in many, many people, you get trapped in the periphery. You start imitating. You start trying to look according to how it should appear. And then, of course, you are lost. Because you are not connecting to the essence. You are not connecting in a more wakeful and deeper way. So it is very, very valuable to understand that you have a great responsibility towards yourself and towards the truth, towards the Creator. Because what we imagine about the reality and the creation and the truth is our imagination. And when we are courageously honest to see that and put our knowledge aside and not follow our fear blindly, then we become carefully available, carefully open. And it is a vulnerability which you can live only through ongoing consciousness. Because when you are not conscious, the automatism comes. When fear is there, and the tendency to run into some kind of security, to avoid, to get distracted, to run away to some kind of state where you don't have to feel all these things. And these tendencies are so subtle, and you can justify it in so many ways. That is what I mean, become simple. Be in touch with that what really is. And you don't need to try to change yourself, you need to see how nature is working, and through that become aware of the blessing, become aware of the wonder, become aware of the fact that this life is not a punishment, that you are not thrown into something to suffer, but your suffering is connected with many misunderstandings. And rather than going to fight against it and trying to run away from the apparent suffering, look at everything and learn to wait so that the understanding can happen when you are not trying to figure it out from the head. That is why patience is very, very important. And patience, not as a concept to force a certain patient look, patience by becoming aware of the impatience, looking at the process of impatience and all the fear, all the calculations, all the anxiety, and all the feeling of helplessness. Watch everything. And staying with that what is in this way, you start becoming more directly, deeply capable to receive, to experience that what really is. So this is your responsibility towards yourself. This is your chance, this is your blessing. But you have to understand it rightly and bring it in life. Because you have been used to so many ways of going around, fighting, struggling, trying to prove yourself to be clever, to be special, to find arguments and cover up in many ways, bring to the outside a certain image of perfection. One can say it's all human, but that means don't go into condemning yourself or punishing yourself about it. Instead, understand what really is. Let yourself become aware of what is going on, what is the nature of reality. And this is very, very important when you become capable to allow it. You become ready to receive. And that is what humility means. Humility means that you are not clinging to your knowledge. You are not going with your judgments and seeking some kind of hold in anything. And these are deep steps because it doesn't happen by the side. The tendency is different. The automatism is working differently. And when you are not present, the automatism immediately overtakes you. I speak about it almost every meeting. So you see the challenge what you have, but at the same time also recognize how simple it is. And also start recognizing the support which you are getting from life. That in spite of all the mistakes and all the misunderstandings what we have accumulated or collected or gone through, life has not given up on you. Life is supporting you to continue to inquire. And when you don't give up, life doesn't give up. You may feel tired, you may want to finish it all, you may want to get rid of all the problems and have it completely comfortable immediately. Everything has its time. Through this, what is going on, we need to understand. We need to see. We need to bring a quality of receptivity which is connected with consciousness. And that is what is meant when it is said, live with the quality of sacredness. That makes all the difference. Because then you remember that how I see it and my mind interprets it is one thing, but there is a deeper basis of reality which is beyond my interpretation, beyond my logic, beyond my knowledge. And I cannot reduce it into knowledge. So live with that wakefulness that you don't lose connection to yourself. You don't lose connection to this dimension of sacredness.
More in moments.
You're watching the Life Surfing podcast on Spotify.
Many people talk about common sense. But from what basis? Join me and let us discover the hidden source of joy in us to find the real clarity and the basis for true common sense. Check it out exclusively on Udemy, an online platform for the courses.
Did you already know that besides the life surfing seminars, workshops, and talks, you can also book individual sessions with Bhashkar directly in person or over Zoom?
For that, please contact Noria under the email address or over the phone 049761709665. In case you want to write an email, you find the email address in the podcast description.
If any question is there or anything arising in anyone from here or from elsewhere, we can still take some time.
Questions can be submitted via the Spotify comments.
So if nothing else is there in anyone, we will sit the next half hour being wakeful and present to all what is, without trying to change anything, without trying to hold to anything, or without trying to get rid of anything, without identifying with anything. Be with this wakeful presence in a non-interfering way. With this orientation, we stay with closed eyes for the next half hour.
The Life Surfing podcast will be back next week. In the meantime, make sure that you're following us right here on Spotify.